maybe 45, maybe 65. Every morning begins the same way. You wake up, get ready, go to work, eat, talk to people, then do it all again tomorrow. From the outside, everything seems fine. Responsibilities are handled, bills are paid, life keeps moving. Yet somewhere beneath the routine, a quiet question refuses to disappear. When did life become something you simply manage instead of something you truly live? Nothing dramatic had to happen. It happened slowly, one compromise at a time, one distraction after another, until one day you look at your own life and realize you've become a stranger to yourself. This is how people quietly lose themselves, not through one great failure, but through countless moments of neglect. Every time you trade attention for distraction, discipline for comfort, or values for convenience, you drift a little farther from the person you were capable of becoming. The ancient Stoics understood this long before the modern world filled every empty moment with noise. They knew that the greatest danger was never hardship itself. It was allowing hardship, comfort, fear, or the opinions of others to shape your character more than your own principles. Stoicism was never about escaping life's difficulties. It was about becoming the kind of person who remains steady in the middle of them. A person whose mind is no longer ruled by distractions, whose body reflects discipline rather than impulse, and whose heart remains open without becoming fragile. The path back has always been the same. It begins within. And every lasting transformation starts with the quiet decision to rebuild yourself before trying to rebuild your circumstances. The first thing that must be rebuilt is the mind, because every victory and every defeat is experienced there long before either one becomes visible in the world around you. Most people spend their lives believing their greatest obstacles are difficult people, unexpected setbacks, or circumstances beyond their control. The Stoics saw something different. They believed that no outside force has the power to disturb a person as deeply as an undisciplined mind. A storm outside may delay your journey, but a storm within can prevent you from taking the first step at all. That is why the condition of your thoughts deserves more attention than the condition of your surroundings. One shapes your experience, while the other merely presents it. Every day offers countless opportunities to strengthen or weaken the way you think, often without you even noticing. The direction of your life begins quietly, in places no one else can see. Modern life rarely encourages that kind of awareness. It teaches you to react before you reflect. A notification appears, and your attention follows it without resistance. Someone shares an opinion, and your emotions begin moving before your reason has even arrived. The news predicts disaster, social media celebrates impossible standards, and endless comparisons slowly convince you that your own life is somehow falling behind. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. None of these influences ask for permission. They simply arrive, and if your mind has no discipline, they settle in as though they belong there. Before long, your thoughts are no longer entirely your own. They become a collection of borrowed fears, borrowed ambitions, and borrowed expectations. The strange part is that this process feels normal because it happens gradually. You do not wake up one morning and decide to surrender your peace. You surrender it one distraction at a time. The Stoics understood that attention is one of the most valuable resources a person possesses, because wherever attention remains, character quietly follows. If your attention is constantly pulled toward things you cannot control, your peace becomes dependent on uncertainty. If it is rooted in what you can influence, your stability grows regardless of what happens around you. This is why Stoicism places so much importance on distinguishing between what belongs to you and what does not. Your thoughts, choices, judgments, and actions belong to you. Other people's opinions, changing circumstances, and the unpredictable nature of life never truly have. Yet many people reverse this order. They spend endless energy trying to control the uncontrollable while neglecting the one place where genuine influence actually exists. It is a frustrating way to live because no amount of effort can produce lasting peace when it is invested in the wrong direction. Think about how often your mood changes because of something entirely outside your control. A careless comment from another person lingers in your mind for hours. A delayed opportunity suddenly makes you question your worth. Someone else's success quietly becomes evidence that you are somehow failing. None of these events possess real authority over your inner life until your judgment grants it to them. This was one of the most practical lessons the Stoics offered. Events themselves remain neutral. It is our interpretation that gives them emotional weight. That realization does not eliminate pain or disappointment, but it restores something far more valuable. It reminds you that there is always a space between what happens and how you choose to respond. Within that space lies freedom, and like every meaningful form of freedom, it must be strengthened through practice rather than discovered by accident. This is why rebuilding the mind cannot begin with chasing motivation. Motivation rises and falls with emotion, and emotions naturally change. Discipline grows from something steadier. It grows from repeatedly choosing what is right over what feels immediately comfortable. Some mornings your thoughts will feel calm. Other mornings they will race without invitation. The goal is not to eliminate difficult thoughts altogether, because that is impossible. Even the wisest Stoics admitted that unwanted impressions appear without warning. The difference lies in whether you immediately accept them as truth or calmly examine them before allowing them to shape your actions. A fearful thought is not a command. A doubtful thought is not a prediction. An angry thought is not your identity. They are visitors, and not every visitor deserves a permanent place in your home. That perspective changes the way you experience everyday life. Instead of treating every passing emotion as a reflection of reality, you begin treating it as information that deserves careful observation. You become less impulsive, not because you no longer feel deeply, but because you recognize that feelings often speak before wisdom has finished thinking. A disciplined mind develops the quiet confidence to pause. That pause may only last a few seconds, yet those few seconds often determine whether a conversation heals or becomes another unnecessary conflict, whether a setback becomes another excuse or another lesson, whether an ordinary day quietly strengthens your character or weakens it without your awareness. If this way of thinking resonates with you, consider subscribing to return regularly to ideas that sharpen your judgment, strengthen your character, and remind you that the greatest work you will ever do is the work within. Plans still fail, problems still arise. None of those realities disappear simply because you have embraced Stoicism. As Epictetus taught, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. What changes is the amount of control those events hold over your peace of mind. You stop treating every inconvenience as a personal attack on your happiness. Instead, you begin asking a quieter question. What kind of person does this moment invite me to become? That single shift redirects your attention away from the event itself and toward the character you are shaping through it. Little by little, your inner world becomes less crowded. The unnecessary noise begins losing its influence because you no longer feed it with constant attention. Clarity returns, not as a sudden breakthrough, but as the result of many small decisions repeated consistently. You become more deliberate about what deserves your focus, more careful about the stories you tell yourself, and more willing to release thoughts that offer nothing except anxiety. This is where rebuilding truly begins, not by escaping the world, but by refusing to let the world decide what occupies your mind. Every thought you choose to nourish becomes another brick in the foundation of your future character. Long before your actions reveal who you are, your attention has already made that decision. Once your attention begins returning to you, something else begins to change as well. The constant noise that once filled every quiet moment slowly loses its grip, and in that silence, a deeper question finally has room to appear. If your life is no longer organized around distractions, expectations, and endless reactions, then what is it actually organized around? Many people spend years chasing goals without ever asking that question. They move from one achievement to the next, believing the next promotion, the next purchase, or the next milestone will finally provide a lasting sense of fulfillment. Yet every accomplishment eventually becomes ordinary, and the satisfaction they expected fades more quickly than they imagined. The Stoics understood this pattern because they knew that external success can never permanently satisfy an inner life that lacks direction. Achievement has value, but only when it grows from character instead of replacing it. There is a subtle danger in living only for accomplishments, because accomplishments are temporary by nature. Once one goal is reached, another immediately appears. The finish line keeps moving, and peace remains somewhere in the distance. A person who depends entirely on achievement for self-worth eventually becomes trapped in an endless cycle of proving themselves. There is always someone more successful, more talented, or further ahead. Comparison quietly replaces gratitude, and ambition begins serving insecurity instead of purpose. The Stoics encouraged a different approach. They believed the greatest measure of progress was not how much you possessed, but how faithfully you lived according to your principles. External victories could be celebrated, but they were never allowed to define the value of the individual pursuing them. This way of thinking changes your relationship with success itself. Instead of asking whether your efforts produced immediate rewards, you begin asking whether those efforts reflected the kind of person you hope to become. That question rarely has an easy answer, but it is far more valuable than measuring life through outcomes alone. Sometimes the right decision leads to immediate disappointment. Sometimes integrity costs opportunities that compromise would have secured. Sometimes patience appears less rewarding than impatience in the short term. Yet none of those moments erase the quiet strength gained by remaining loyal to your values. The Stoics believed that virtue carries its own reward, because every honorable action strengthens the one thing that remains with you throughout your entire life: your character. As this perspective settles in, daily challenges begin looking different. Difficult conversations stop feeling like interruptions and start becoming opportunities to practice self-control. Delays become lessons in patience instead of reasons for frustration. Failure becomes information instead of evidence that you are incapable. The circumstances themselves may remain exactly the same, but your relationship with them begins to evolve. Instead of constantly asking why life feels difficult, you begin noticing what each difficulty is revealing about you. Weaknesses that once felt embarrassing become areas where growth is possible. Strengths that once depended on praise become quieter, steadier, and less dependent on recognition from other people. Growth rarely announces itself in dramatic ways. More often, it arrives through changes that almost go unnoticed. You become less reactive when someone misunderstands you. You stop needing every conversation to end with your opinion being accepted. You notice disappointment without allowing it to define your entire day. These shifts may seem small from the outside, yet they represent profound changes within. A stronger character is usually recognized not by louder confidence, but by greater stability. The need to constantly defend yourself begins fading because your sense of worth no longer depends on winning every argument or impressing every person you meet. There is a quiet freedom in no longer needing to perform for approval. This freedom also changes how you think about the future. Many people postpone becoming the person they want to be until life becomes easier. They tell themselves discipline will come after circumstances improve, or that peace will arrive once enough goals have been achieved. The Stoics challenged that belief completely. As Seneca wrote, "While we wait for life, life passes." Waiting for ideal conditions only deepens your dependence on conditions that may never arrive. Character is built now, in the middle of imperfect circumstances, through the choices available in the present moment. The future is shaped less by dramatic breakthroughs than by the habits you continue practicing long before the results become visible. Eventually, a simple truth becomes impossible to ignore. Life is always shaping you, whether you participate consciously or not. Every repeated action reinforces a pattern. Every repeated thought strengthens a belief. Every repeated response becomes part of your identity. This is why paying attention to seemingly ordinary decisions matters so much. They are never merely isolated moments. They are rehearsals for the person you are becoming. The Stoics understood that destiny is rarely created by one extraordinary choice. It is quietly formed through the direction of everyday habits, each one carrying you a little closer to the person you are choosing to become. When that realization takes root, the goal is no longer to make life easier at every opportunity. The deeper goal becomes becoming stronger, wiser, and more grounded with every decision, allowing each challenge to reveal not your limitations, but the quiet strength that has been growing within you all along. Even the most disciplined mind eventually reaches a point where effort alone no longer feels like enough. You learn to guard your attention, you become more deliberate with your choices, and you begin noticing the difference between reacting and responding. Then something unexpected happens. Resistance appears again, but this time it does not come from the outside world. It rises from within. Old beliefs begin speaking with familiar voices, reminding you of every failure, every disappointment, and every moment when life did not unfold the way you hoped. These thoughts feel convincing because they have been repeated for years. They sound less like opinions and more like facts. That is why they are so difficult to recognize. The greatest obstacles are often the ones that have quietly become part of your identity without your permission. The Stoics understood that people rarely suffer only because of events themselves. They suffer because of the meanings they attach to those events. Two people can experience the same setback and walk away with completely different futures. One concludes that failure proves they are incapable. The other sees the same experience as evidence that growth requires patience. Nothing about the event changes. Only the interpretation does. Yet that interpretation influences every decision that follows. This is why the stories you tell yourself deserve careful attention. They become the lens through which every opportunity, every relationship, and every challenge is viewed. If the lens is distorted, reality begins looking distorted as well, even when nothing outside has actually changed. This is where Stoicism offers one of its most practical lessons. Thoughts deserve examination before they deserve agreement. Just because an idea enters your mind does not mean it speaks the truth. A fearful prediction is still only a prediction. A harsh judgment about yourself remains a judgment, not a permanent description of your character. The Stoics encouraged careful observation because they knew that the first impression is not always the wisest one. There is power in creating a small pause between the thought that appears and the belief that follows. Inside that pause, reason has an opportunity to speak. Without it, old assumptions continue directing your life without ever facing honest examination. As old assumptions lose their authority, the world itself starts looking different. Opportunities that once seemed unreachable begin appearing within reach. Conversations become less threatening because your worth is no longer hanging on every outcome. Mistakes become teachers instead of permanent verdicts. You notice that confidence does not arrive because fear disappears. It arrives because fear is no longer allowed to make every important decision. This quiet shift changes more than your thinking. It changes the direction of your life. Every step forward becomes evidence that your past interpretations do not have to determine your future choices. Little by little, the inner conversation changes. The voice that once predicted defeat begins asking for evidence before reaching conclusions. The fear that once demanded obedience becomes something you can acknowledge without automatically following. You realize that your greatest limitation was never the circumstance itself, but the belief that the circumstance had already decided who you were allowed to become. That realization does not erase every obstacle, but it transforms your relationship with them. Instead of seeing barriers everywhere you look, you begin seeing invitations to practice wisdom, patience, and courage. The walls that once appeared permanent reveal themselves as habits of thought, and habits can always be replaced by better ones. That is where genuine freedom quietly begins, not through changing the world around you, but through refusing to let yesterday's assumptions continue writing tomorrow's story. As your thinking begins to change, something else quietly starts revealing the truth. Your body becomes a mirror. It reflects whether your new beliefs are genuine convictions or simply comforting ideas that sound inspiring for a few moments before disappearing. It is easy to believe you value discipline while sitting in comfort. It is much harder to prove that belief when the alarm rings before sunrise, when fatigue settles in after a long day, or when every part of you wants to postpone what you already know should be done. This is where philosophy leaves the page and enters ordinary life. The Stoics never viewed the body as separate from the mind, because every action either reinforces or weakens the principles you claim to follow. Thoughts create direction, but actions reveal commitment. Without action, even the noblest ideas slowly become another form of entertainment. The remarkable thing about discipline is that it rarely asks for extraordinary effort all at once. More often, it asks for ordinary effort repeated long enough to become natural. Rising from bed when comfort invites you to remain still, taking a walk when your mind suggests postponing it until tomorrow, choosing nourishing food even when unhealthy options promise immediate satisfaction, sitting down to complete meaningful work before distractions begin claiming your attention. None of these decisions seem impressive on their own. Most people would overlook them completely, yet over weeks, months, and years, they create two entirely different lives. One life is shaped by deliberate choices. The other is shaped by impulses. The difference between them is rarely dramatic in a single day, but it becomes impossible to ignore over time. Motivation, after all, is an unreliable companion. Some mornings it arrives effortlessly. Other days it seems completely absent. If your actions depend entirely upon feeling inspired, consistency becomes impossible. The Stoics placed little faith in emotional momentum because emotions naturally change. They believed that purpose should remain steady even when feelings fluctuate. This does not mean ignoring emotions or pretending they do not exist. It means recognizing that meaningful action often comes first, while motivation quietly follows afterward. Waiting until you feel ready can become a subtle form of avoidance. Beginning despite uncertainty builds a different kind of strength, one rooted in choice rather than emotion. There is also something deeply freeing about accepting that progress is usually unremarkable. Many people abandon good habits because they expect immediate transformation. They imagine discipline should produce dramatic results within days. And when life continues looking much the same, discouragement begins to grow. Nature rarely works that way. A tree does not become strong in one afternoon. A river shapes stone through persistence rather than force. Human character follows a similar pattern. Every disciplined action is like placing another stone in a foundation that may remain invisible for a long time before anyone notices the structure rising above it. The absence of immediate results does not mean nothing is changing. Often the most important growth is happening where it cannot yet be seen. Physical discipline eventually leads to a realization that many people overlook. You can train your body, sharpen your habits, and develop remarkable self-control, yet still feel a quiet heaviness that no amount of achievement seems able to lift. There comes a point when strength alone is no longer enough, because the greatest burden is no longer physical, it is emotional. A person can appear composed while carrying years of resentment. They can remain productive while quietly living with regret. They can maintain discipline in every visible area of life, while privately exhausting themselves with old disappointments they have never truly released. The Stoics understood that lasting peace requires more than controlling your actions. It also requires examining what your heart continues to carry long after the moment has passed. Anything left unresolved eventually finds a way to shape your thoughts, influence your choices, and quietly steal your presence. Holding on to resentment often feels like protection. The mind quietly convinces itself that remembering every injury prevents future suffering. Yet resentment rarely harms the person who caused the original pain. It quietly reshapes the one carrying it. It steals attention from the present, fills ordinary moments with old conversations, and slowly convinces you that caution is the same as wisdom. Over time, the heart becomes guarded not only against future hurt, but also against future joy. Gratitude struggles to grow where bitterness occupies every available space. Trust becomes difficult because fear constantly whispers reminders of yesterday. The Stoics understood that forgiveness is not about pretending injustice never happened. It is about refusing to remain emotionally chained to something that no longer deserves authority over your life. This does not mean forgetting painful experiences or abandoning healthy boundaries. Wisdom requires remembering lessons without continuously reliving the suffering that taught them. There is a quiet strength in learning from hardship while refusing to become defined by it. A difficult relationship may teach discernment without teaching permanent suspicion. A painful mistake may teach humility without creating endless shame. Every experience carries a lesson, but not every emotion attached to that experience needs to remain forever. The heart becomes stronger when it learns to carry wisdom instead of wounds. That shift rarely happens through one dramatic breakthrough. More often, it develops through repeated choices to respond differently whenever old memories attempt to reclaim the present moment. As this burden begins lifting, something unexpected happens. Life starts feeling more immediate again. Simple conversations become more meaningful because your attention is no longer divided between the present and unresolved pieces of the past. Small moments of gratitude become easier to recognize because your mind is no longer occupied by constant emotional defense. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." You discover that openness is not weakness, but courage expressed quietly. It takes far more strength to remain kind after disappointment than to become permanently cynical. It takes greater discipline to continue trusting wisely than to believe everyone deserves suspicion. The Stoics admired this kind of strength because it reflected mastery over oneself rather than control over other people. Real resilience begins revealing itself in ordinary moments. It appears when criticism no longer destroys your peace because your worth does not depend on approval. It appears when disappointment no longer becomes despair because you understand that circumstances cannot diminish your character without your permission. It appears when kindness survives despite previous hurt, not because pain has been forgotten, but because wisdom has transformed it into something useful instead of something heavy. This is how the heart slowly recovers its natural strength, not by becoming harder, but by becoming steadier. Eventually, you begin seeing that protecting your heart does not require building higher walls. It requires building deeper understanding. The strongest people are rarely those who have avoided suffering. More often, they are those who have allowed suffering to refine rather than harden them. They remain compassionate without becoming naive, patient without becoming passive, and hopeful without ignoring reality. The world continues offering reasons to become bitter, fearful, or closed, yet they quietly choose another response because they know their character is worth protecting more than their comfort. That is the freedom the Stoics pointed toward. A heart that remains open without becoming fragile, peaceful without becoming indifferent, and strong enough to meet life honestly without allowing life to decide the kind of person it will become. When the mind grows clearer, the body grows stronger, and the heart grows lighter. something remarkable begins to happen. The world itself does not suddenly become easier, but your experience of it changes in ways that are difficult to explain until you have lived through them. The same responsibilities remain. The same uncertainties still exist. Difficult people do not disappear, and unexpected problems continue arriving without warning, yet they no longer feel like personal attacks against your peace. Instead, they become opportunities to apply everything you have been quietly practicing. This is where Stoicism moves beyond philosophy and becomes a way of living. Wisdom is no longer something you admire from a distance. It becomes something you carry into ordinary moments, shaping your responses long before anyone else notices the difference. Real transformation is often invisible because it happens first in the way you interpret life before it changes the life itself. The Stoics believed philosophy was never meant to remain inside books or conversations. Knowledge without practice was incomplete because understanding alone could never reshape character. Every principle had to survive contact with reality. Patience had to exist in frustrating conversations. Courage had to exist when certainty disappeared. Self-control had to exist when emotions demanded immediate action. It is easy to appreciate wisdom during quiet moments of reflection. The greater challenge is remembering it when life becomes inconvenient. That is why every ordinary day offers opportunities that many people overlook. A delayed plan becomes a chance to practice acceptance. A disagreement becomes an opportunity to listen before reacting. A disappointment becomes another reminder that your peace does not have to rise and fall with circumstances beyond your influence. This shift is subtle at first. You begin noticing that situations which once consumed your thoughts now pass through your mind without leaving the same lasting impact. An unexpected criticism no longer follows you for days because you have learned to separate another person's opinion from your own character. As Epictetus reminded us, if anyone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, do not make excuses about what is said of you, but answer, "He was ignorant of my other faults, else he would not have mentioned these alone." A mistake still matters, but it becomes something to correct instead of something to carry endlessly. Even uncertainty begins losing some of its power because you stop demanding guarantees before taking action. The future remains unknown, yet you become less afraid of it because your confidence slowly moves away from outcomes and settles into something steadier. You begin trusting your ability to respond wisely rather than expecting life to unfold exactly as planned. This is one of the quiet strengths Stoicism develops. Instead of preparing you for one specific challenge, it prepares you to meet whatever challenge arrives. That distinction changes everything. Many people spend their lives trying to predict every possible difficulty so they can avoid discomfort before it appears. The Stoics understood that this pursuit never ends because life continues presenting new situations no one could have anticipated. Rather than controlling every circumstance, they focused on strengthening the one thing carried into every circumstance: character. A disciplined mind, a steady heart, and consistent actions become reliable companions wherever life leads. External conditions continue changing, but the foundation beneath them grows increasingly stable. Over time, this changes the way you think about success itself. Success is no longer measured only by achievements, recognition, or visible accomplishments. Those things may still hold value, but they stop becoming the primary measure of a meaningful life. A successful day becomes one where you remained patient despite frustration. It becomes a day where you acted according to your principles instead of your impulses. It becomes a day where integrity mattered more than convenience. These victories often pass unnoticed by everyone else, yet they slowly build something far more lasting than external praise. They strengthen the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your behavior reflects your values even when no one is watching. There is also a growing sense of freedom that develops alongside this way of living. You stop waiting for perfect circumstances before allowing yourself to experience peace. Many people unknowingly postpone contentment until everything finally falls into place. They believe happiness belongs somewhere in the future, waiting beyond the next accomplishment or the next solved problem. The Stoics challenged that belief completely. They understood that life will always contain uncertainty because uncertainty is woven into existence itself. Waiting for complete security before living wisely means waiting forever. Instead, they practiced finding steadiness within changing conditions, understanding that inner stability creates a kind of freedom no external event can permanently take away. This does not mean becoming passive or indifferent. Quite the opposite. Accepting reality allows you to engage with it more effectively because your energy is no longer wasted resisting what cannot be changed. You become more present in conversations because your attention is no longer divided between reality and the wish that reality were different. You become more thoughtful in difficult moments because your first instinct is observation rather than reaction. Small acts of kindness become easier because resentment occupies less space within you. Gradually, life begins feeling less like something happening to you and more like something you are participating in with awareness and intention. Another unexpected change begins appearing in your relationships. People notice that you respond differently even if they cannot explain exactly why. You become slower to judge, quicker to listen, and less interested in proving yourself right. Conversations become calmer because your identity no longer depends on winning every disagreement. You discover that influence rarely comes from speaking the loudest. More often, it grows from remaining steady when others become overwhelmed. The Stoics valued this quiet strength because it reflected genuine mastery. Anyone can remain calm when life is comfortable. Remaining composed while facing disappointment reveals a much deeper kind of discipline. Eventually, the search for perfect conditions quietly fades away. You stop believing that a better future requires a different world before it requires a different way of living. Challenges continue arriving, but they no longer interrupt your growth. They become part of it. Every obstacle invites another opportunity to practice patience. Every uncertainty asks for another act of courage. Every setback becomes another reminder that your greatest advantage has never been complete control over circumstances. It has always been the person you are becoming while living through them. That realization changes the entire direction of your life because your focus shifts away from chasing easier days and toward becoming someone capable of meeting difficult ones with wisdom, steadiness, and quiet confidence. From that point forward, progress is no longer defined by how comfortable life becomes, but by how consistently your character remains rooted, regardless of what each new day decides to bring. Eventually, the greatest transformation becomes so quiet that almost no one notices it except you. There is no dramatic announcement, no single morning when everything suddenly feels different. Instead, you begin recognizing small changes that would have seemed impossible months or years earlier. Situations that once stole your peace now pass through your day without leaving the same mark. Conversations that once ended in frustration now end with understanding, even if agreement is never reached. The victories become less visible because they are happening inside your character rather than around your circumstances. The Stoics believed this was the highest kind of progress. A person does not become stronger because life finally becomes gentle. A person becomes stronger because they no longer require life to be gentle in order to remain steady. That kind of strength cannot be measured by applause or recognition. It reveals itself in ordinary moments that most people overlook, yet those moments quietly shape an extraordinary life. One of the first signs of this transformation is the way you respond instead of react. There was a time when every inconvenience demanded an emotional response. Delays felt personal. Criticism lingered for days. Unexpected changes created frustration before reason had the opportunity to speak. Gradually, those patterns begin losing their influence. The space between an event and your response grows wider. Within that space, wisdom has room to act. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." You stop believing that every thought deserves immediate agreement and every emotion deserves immediate expression. Instead, you observe first and respond second. This simple habit changes more than individual moments. It changes the direction of your entire life, because decisions guided by reflection almost always lead somewhere different than decisions guided by impulse. The Stoics practiced this discipline every day, understanding that self-mastery begins with mastering the pause before action. Another quiet change begins appearing in the way you carry disappointment. It does not disappear completely, because disappointment is part of every meaningful life. Plans still fail. People still misunderstand you. Loss still arrives without invitation. The difference is that these experiences no longer define your identity. They become events rather than permanent conclusions about who you are. You recover more quickly because your sense of worth is no longer attached to every outcome. Instead of asking why life has become difficult, your attention naturally shifts toward asking what this moment requires from your character. Sometimes it asks for patience, sometimes courage, sometimes humility. Whatever the answer, you begin meeting life with greater willingness because you understand that every challenge offers another opportunity to strengthen the qualities that matter most. Complaining also begins losing its appeal. This does not happen because problems disappear or because you pretend everything is perfect. It happens because you realize that constant complaint rarely changes reality, while almost always weakening your own perspective. The Stoics encouraged accepting reality as it is, not because they lacked ambition, but because they understood that clear thinking always begins with honest observation. Energy once spent resisting unavoidable circumstances becomes available for meaningful action. You stop wasting strength wishing yesterday had unfolded differently or demanding that tomorrow provide guarantees it cannot give. Instead, you quietly ask what can be done now. That question carries remarkable power because it keeps your attention rooted where influence actually exists. As this way of living deepens, something else begins to settle within you. The endless need for external validation slowly fades. Praise becomes pleasant, but no longer necessary. Criticism becomes useful when deserved and easier to release when it is not. You stop measuring yourself against every person who seems further ahead because your attention has shifted toward a different standard. Progress is no longer determined by comparison but by consistency. Relationships also begin changing in subtle ways. Because you are no longer carrying every conversation as a test of your worth, you become more present with the people around you. Listening becomes easier than interrupting. Understanding becomes more important than winning. You notice that genuine connection grows through patience rather than persuasion. People often respond differently to someone who remains calm under pressure because steadiness has a quiet influence of its own. Even when others remain impatient or emotional, you no longer feel responsible for matching their pace. You begin realizing that another person's behavior belongs to them, while your response always belongs to you. This understanding creates healthier boundaries because it separates compassion from unnecessary emotional dependence. There is also a deeper appreciation for ordinary life that slowly develops. The search for constant excitement loses much of its urgency because meaning begins appearing in places where it once went unnoticed. A peaceful morning becomes enough. A thoughtful conversation carries lasting value. Completing a responsibility with care becomes satisfying in its own way. Gratitude grows naturally because your attention is no longer consumed by everything still missing. The Stoics often reflected on the temporary nature of life, not to create fear, but to encourage appreciation. Recognizing that nothing lasts forever changes the way you experience what is already here. You become less distracted by endless desire and more aware of the quiet richness already present within everyday moments. Over time, the mind, the body, and the heart stop competing for attention. They begin supporting one another. Clear thinking encourages disciplined action. Disciplined action strengthens emotional stability. Emotional stability makes clear thinking easier. Each part reinforces the others until they begin moving together instead of pulling in different directions. As Aristotle observed, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. This harmony is not perfection. There are still difficult days, moments of weakness, and lessons left to learn. The difference is that setbacks no longer erase your progress because your foundation has become stronger than individual failures. You understand that growth is not a destination reached once and for all. It is a lifelong practice sustained through deliberate choices, repeated with patience. This is the freedom the Stoics devoted their lives to cultivating, not freedom from hardship, uncertainty, or loss, because those belong to every human life, but freedom from becoming controlled by them. The world continues changing exactly as it always has. Fortune rises and falls. Circumstances shift without warning. Seasons of joy and seasons of difficulty arrive one after another. Yet something within you remains remarkably steady. That steadiness is earned one decision at a time, one thoughtful response at a time, one act of discipline at a time. Lasting transformation is rarely loud enough to impress the crowd, but it is powerful enough to reshape an entire life. It takes root quietly, grows patiently, and eventually becomes the kind of strength that no circumstance can easily shake, because it was never built upon circumstances in the first place. It was built upon character, and character is the one possession that becomes more valuable every time it is faithfully lived. Your life will not change because you watched another video. It will change because you choose to live differently after this moment. The Stoics understood that wisdom has no value until it becomes action, and every lasting transformation begins with a single deliberate choice repeated day after day. Keep strengthening your mind, caring for your body, and protecting your character. In time, the life you've been searching for will no longer feel distant. It will be reflected in the person you've become. If you're ready to continue this journey, one of the videos on your screen right now will take you even deeper into the timeless wisdom of Stoicism. Choose the one that speaks to you and keep building the strongest version of yourself, one step at a time. Thank you for being part of Stoic Journal. Until next time, take care of your mind, stay true to your values, and keep walking the path of wisdom.